the problem now, of course, is if you win the war, you can write the story afterwards. But we are losing this war, and well, our political elites are not going to be in a position to write the story afterwards. Indeed, it's going to be proven that everything they've essentially said has been a lie, and it's quite dramatic because we're talking about a legitimacy crisis when governments overstep their democratic mandate in this way. And as these governments become more unpopular, they seem to be, immune from the ballot box. Irrespective of what one thinks about the opposition parties across Europe, it is concerning that the most popular party in Germany now in the polls is AfD. Again, doesn't matter if people support it or not; they're being criminalized. They're openly talking about banning it. In France, they arrested Le Pen. Just in Romania, the election result was essentially just ignored and cancelled. Let's do it over again. We saw how the Moldovan election was manipulated. And if you mention these things, the governments in Europe essentially comes after you. It's quite scary the way. Well, all this talk about our democracy, our values, how it's just sitting on eggshells essentially. But how significant do you think the role is of self-censorship as well? Because now we're talking about direct censorship, the way they're punished, the way election results are reversed, the opposition parties are banned, but and citizens are not just smeared, censored, cancelled, but also sanctioned. But in terms of self-censorship, how do you see this changing among journalists or academics?
Well, let me start with my personal experiences as a journalist and book author and the manager of a news channel and interview and analysis channel on YouTube. I'm receiving thousands over thousands of letters. And most people are telling me, you have the courage to say what I cannot say anymore. I cannot have free speech, and I cannot say my personal position, my personal arguments to my colleagues because it is too dangerous. So self-censorship is following censorship. And this is the situation in Germany today and in other countries. The member of the European Parliament, Michael von der Schulenburg, tried to establish a board of people to help Gbagbo. And he asked professors for justice and all that. And most people refused to join the board because they are living in fear. So what we see right now all over the EU is government by fear and suppression. And this is not democracy. This is an Orwellian dystopy. And we have a lot of instruments to reach this goal. First of all, it is proven by the report of the US Congress that the European Union manipulated 8 elections all over the EU. The most known case is the Romanian case, but also in Slovakia, in France, and other countries. You can download this report in the internet. The next level is internet censorship. The EU Commission invited Meta, Google, TikTok, X, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Rumble, Reddit, and OpenAI and explained completely clearly that they have to manage content in the sense of the EU. If not, they will pay hard sanctions. Hey, they have to pay a lot of money. And this also is not democracy. And then the extra-legal sanctions against Gbagbo and 58 other people not only in the EU, but partly in the EU. And everybody knows that. And on the other hand, the mainstream media, and for me, the so-called propaganda media, don't cover that. They don't report on that. And that means the mainstream media are part of the propaganda system of NATO.
But how do you see the attack though on reputations? Because when you say people are afraid to speak up, it's the attack on reputation which not just affects professional life but also private life. That this is a key a key aspect of it. So you know, like in this country, I noticed this even against myself. We have, you know, governments. Sometimes they go indirectly. They finance NGOs. They call them human rights NGOs.
Yes.
But you know, you see them. They take, you know, writing all these smears on social media. They would write articles denouncing me as a propagandist for Russia. They write letters to my university, you know, questioning whether or not I should be allowed to work there. They even put pictures of my house on social media after I had to get after I essentially removed my address from yeah, the public realm. And recently we even had the defense minister of Norway coming out. He was making a speech that warning that Norwegians are exposed to Putin's propaganda. And I thought this is weird because Norwegian media only permits one narrative. That is, everything is unprovoked. The Russians, you know, just the new Hitler who wants to restore the Soviet Union. So, so when he was asked, you know, where do they get Putin's propaganda? And he mentioned my name, only my name. And this is a problem that journalists essentially shouldn't talk to me because that means they're giving platform. And the great crime, according to him, I said that the NATO had contributed to provoking the war. I mean, if we had open discourse, if you're allowed to discuss what's actually happening in Ukraine, if you want to solve it, it's very easy. It doesn't. I mean, there's an abundance of evidence to prove this. But what I found fascinating, they don't look at evidence as a way of how to solve a crisis. They see it as almost treasonous that you picked a side of the enemy by suggesting that perhaps we contributed to this. So perhaps there's a political solution. It's quite scary to see how, I mean, this is the this is essentially the executive branch, which is saying this is the official truths which the government has the right to promote, and anyone who goes against it will be then smeared and attacked by the government. I mean, it's just it's such a far cry away from anything that can be considered to be democratic. Of course, it's not even in the ballpark what has happened to Colonel Jacques, but nonetheless. So I got off point there. I was going to ask, yeah, in terms of this reputational pressure, how are you assessing this?
I made the same experience as you in Germany. If you read Wikipedia, or according to the mainstream press in Germany, I was a poll watcher of Mr. Putin during the referenda in the Donbass in fall 2022, which I was not. And I brought this to a court, and the court made in its decision very clear that I was not a poll watcher, that I was on my way as a journalist. But they are repeating all the way the same shit. And responsible for that is, among others, a government-financed and EU-financed so-called non-government organization called Fake Observers. And I was not a fake observer. Absolutely not. So we arrived in a state of fake news, completely fake news. And Jacques Baab wrote and published recently a book on that, Government by Fake News. And this is the world we are living in. They are betraying and lying to the people all over the EU, because the reality on the ground, on the battlefield, is completely different to the press reports. And it is completely different to the information of the news shows. They were not on the ground. It's just fantasy. It's just propaganda. And all ideological apparatuses are supporting this propaganda systems. The school, the universities, the so-called non-government organizations, the think tanks, the institutions of the government, and so on and so on. All these institutions and the churches as well, they are all spreading the same and publishing the same propaganda. And that's the problem. So the only way to get out of this propaganda system is for the citizens to make their own investigations and to choose other sources, possibly the new media, and that would be best. But this is the way, by destroying the democratic debate space, this is the way for the established party to stay in power.